Welcome back to another episode in our template golf design series, and in this one we're going to look at the bottle hole, which there's not a huge amount of information on, so we're not really going to look at spins and prototypes as such as just examining the key concept and ways in which people have used it. We're looking here at the third at Strathlorne, and this is a template that I use an awful lot because of the lack of information. There's a lot of freedom in how you might use it, but I think the concept is great. So we're going to dig into what this is, look at some geometric and non-geometric examples, and hopefully give you something that you can take away and use in your own designs. So what are our key concepts with a bottle hole? Principally, it's a choice between either angle or distance. Now, there's two main ways in which people have interpreted this. One of them, and the way I tend to subscribe to, is you have your ideal line to the green, and then you basically restrict the distance a player can hit on that line, whereas you allow them as much space as they want on an unideal line. For me, therefore, this works really nicely with a shortish par 4. If we bring up our overhead map and you look at the way the green is oriented, so running down this sort of line, well, the further we are towards the right hand side of the fairway, the better the angle in, even though it's a longer shot. Whereas if we hit driver down here, you can see how much that angle is changing. If you're just looking at this dotted line, you can see to what extent hitting driver, or we're hitting right across that green, which is far narrower than it is long. If we hit 3-wood down to this part, you've got a longer shot, but it's a better angle. And you're giving people, therefore, a really clear choice, and you're not forcing one way on them as to how to play the hole. You can play it the strategic way and hit 3-wood to here, which is not an easy shot, guarded by a large bunker, and you have a better look down the green. If you go driver all the way down here, you're hitting across that green. So the other way of looking at it is then making the ideal line more of a narrows, and you'll see in some holes that we look at later that people do allow you to hit as far as you want down the ideal line. It's just far more bottled or tight. There are different real life holes that have influenced this. The 10th, I think, 12th at Sunningdale Old is kind of one of the bottle holes that does the way that I'm doing it, where it cuts off on the ideal line, versus ones at NGLA or some of them in America where you can hit but it's just tighter. So looking at this hole in particular, there's a couple of things that I think really emphasize those decisions. So we start with basically you want to hit 3-wood down here. You're going to have a better look into the green because you can suddenly use all of these helper slopes rather than coming in at this angle, and you can still make a score from there. I was trying not to force people to play it one way or another. However, how do we really exaggerate those angles? Well, there's a bit of a spine here, which is obviously deliberate, and if you hit driver down here, it's just going to move the ball even further left, meaning you're coming more across the green. You can lay back, so the really safe play is still on, but that gives you neither angle nor direction, and it's a conservative way to play the hole. You'll probably make par, you'll less likely make birdie. You can play even safer. That does bring this bunker in. So if you have the 5-wood and you're slightly downwind, this is probably the play because then you won't run out of fairway. But we'll try to hit just a little 3-wood down this side, and you'll see what the second shot looks like. The ground also contours to move the ball a little bit further right, and then you're hitting not at this bunker, which you might be if you've got a pitch shot from this side. There's potential of going into that. You're not hitting down the slopes. You can really just hit an iron, and it kind of punch bowls a little bit in this back corner as well. So what this should end up as is hopefully a pretty good birdie opportunity. So leaping back into the designer view, because I think pin positions can also add a bit more to this, we're going to look first of all at pin 2, where it may not look like it, but this one's the one that most exaggerates the ideal side from the fairway. So if you look at coming at it from where we just did, so from over this side, well, okay, we've got a little slope to worry about here and a little one here, but we're generally coming straight down the pin, and we've got a backstop here that we can use to help us, and a feeder slope here that if we're long and left is going to kick us back down. We have probably, I would say, around 20 yards in which we can land this and release it on, and you've got a pretty good margin for error. We're now going to compare that to if you'd hit driver and come down here. Okay, you've got 94, so you've probably still got a wedge. If we're hitting driver, you've hit that down slope and probably ended up here. Sometimes you might be kicked off into the heavy rough. That was your worst miss. But look at what you've got to do now. You've got to stop a wedge basically within 6 yards of landing distance. If we compare that to this angle, I think you see the difference as to which way is preferable. Some pins allowed you to choose, so this back pin here, this back pin here. Some required a shot from a slightly specific location, but it was always, in my head, generally preferable to be over here, but I didn't really want you absolutely out of the hole if you were down here, just you have a very different shot. And I think that's what bottles are great for. They give you choices of ways to play the hole, but it's up to you whether you're choosing distance and a shorter shot in, because that's difficult, but you're playing a lob wedge. It's hopefully a relatively straightforward shot, versus pitching wedge from here, and that tee shot is still not easy. So it's really all about choice, and there's variance as well as to which you can do here. You could be laying up 220 and landing to here. You've not got the ideal angle, you've not got the ideal distance, but you'll probably play the hole pretty safely, and if you're playing to this pin, that might be the easiest way to try to make birdie. You can try and hit a 3-wood down the middle, and you're not running out of fairway, but you are possibly landing on a side slope and complicating matters. And I think it's when you start doing all of these things and going, well, here's my option A, here's option B, how can I make everything in between really interesting and give people different shades of grey types of options? I think that's when hole designs get really good. As mentioned at the start, sometimes you will simply tighten the landing zone on one side whilst giving a slightly freer path on the other. In this case, we're looking at the 4th at Springbrook Country Club, which is a bottle hole. You can see there's a lot of space just in here that you can play into. But you've got bunkers that are going to stop you being quite so aggressive. You've got water on the left that may complicate the decision as well. But where's your ideal line? Well, probably up here, which is really tight and really well protected by bunkers either side. But that will give you the best look into that green and allow you to hit more down the green and use the slopes on offer. And you can see the options that you've got available. For shorter drivers, it's a nice straightforward drive down this side. If you've got a longer driver, well, you can potentially chase down this side, and you do get that better look into this green. The more you're coming from this side, you're avoiding that giant fall off that could run you into the water, and the more you can actually take advantage of this spine that can run you. As you look at it from this angle, it's kind of a bit of a runway where either side's going to funnel the board towards the pin. Coming from this side, you're more going over that mound and trying to stop it before this one. So the angle, although subtle, does really matter. But here you can hit driver down either side. It's not completely choked off in the way that Strathlorne's one was, but you can see it's the same concept, choice between angle or distance. So the 4th hole at Charleston Hall again showcases the bottle in a slightly different way, and it shows how there's a couple of different interpretations on this. With this one, you do have the option of taking on the tight line, and that fairway is there, so you can, and if you do hit that, then you're rewarded with a better look into this green and playing away from that sloping from this bunker. Whereas if we don't fancy the challenge of hitting to the really tight part of the fairway, we can go slightly further right and we'll have a longer approach in because we're further away due to how tight the dogleg is. We can drop even further back and play sort of 230 odd yards in, and that leaves us not dead, I wouldn't say. You're ending up with kind of a 6-iron or so in, but as ever with this, it's real risk reward, but also giving you options. If you take on that really tight challenge, you're probably ending up with your best look in and a wedge, whereas back here we're looking at 9-iron, back here we're looking at 6-iron, and you can see how it's really divided that fairway by clever bunkering. Okay, we're going to finish up by looking at my first ever template course and where I really fell in love with strategic design, which is Greenstone River, and the 12th was my favourite hole on that course. Now, you have to bear in mind that this was designed when the driver went 285, so this bunker was very much choking things off, as was this one. So you really had a choice between laying way back or getting more distance this side, and having a worse angle in. Whereas now you can kind of just cut the corner and go over this. But I did want that downwind you could have a go over it. It was always meant to be a long par 4 because I wanted you to be able to actually access the green via the ground as well. And if we have a little look at the green, for what I liked about it, you have this big slope at the back that would run the ball back towards the pin, so that if you did go for the longer route, you could release it off that slope and get it towards it. whereas if you were going the shorter route and coming in more this sort of angle, you could potentially go more straight at it, but I wanted you to have a little run off here that maybe would trouble you. So this one, again, I guess the advances in technology or driver distance has maybe overtaken this hole a little bit. I still think it's a really pretty hole that does what I intended it to, and it's a real favourite of mine. But here, I guess it's more looking at that, the Joe definition of you can really you can always try to find this little gap between on the narrow side, rather than the Strathlorne version where you can't find the narrow side and driver is completely not an option. You have to hit either distance or angle. In this one, you've got a chance of going for both, but you have to be really accurate, particularly when we think that the driver was typically going this distance. So I hope that this has helped give you a little bit of an insight into the bottle hole and how you might be able to use it. There's so many variations on this that it's not really prototype or spin on it. It's more, you've got one clear choice, which is when you give a player a choice between angle or distance, and then allow them to work that in. As you've seen from here, you can do this on long par fours, you can do it on shorter par fours. There's really any number of ways in which you can do it, but I think it's a great hole for simply allowing the player to go where they want to go, rather than enforcing strategy on them, which I think we can all be a little bit guilty of doing at certain points. It's really nice when you think of, well, here's position A, here's position A2, and then go, well, what's the various merits of this side versus this side, and really give the player the choice, like which hazard do they want to take on, what are the merits of the second shot, and maybe they play a different way depending on conditions or tees or what have you. So as ever, I hope that this has helped, and we'll see you again soon.